Is there sound yet?
Yeah, 1 second here. 1 second here. Uh, all right. 1 second. All right, welcome on to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome on to this Q&A. So I heard an interesting question whatever the last few days that someone asked the question, atheist, someone does not believe in the supernatural, doesn't believe in God. Do they get reward for their mitzvahs? Right? That was the overall question. Do they get or they get a portion of the world to come? So God has to reward them, for their mitzvah, right? Anyone who does a mitzvah, even someone who's evil, right? If they do a mitzvah, the problem is somebody who does a mitzvah, but they're not doing it because God said to do it. Question is that fulfilling any mitzvah or not? Right? So whatever, there is a debate on such a thing. That on the one hand, the question is, if anybody does a mitzvah, seemingly they should get reward. So they might get knocked out in the next world. They might, not have a portion of the world to come. But God has to reward those, anybody pretty much who does mitzvahs. Okay. So we'll give them fame, power, wealth, all kinds of things. But they won't have a portion of the world to come. Very good. So even if they don't have a portion of the world to come, he still has to reward them. Others say no. Others say not only won't they have a portion of the world to come, they won't get reward for the mitzvah. Now, why won't they get the reward? Because they're not, an atheist in general is, even if he does something good, he gave charity or helped Granny cross the street, whatever it is, he's not doing it for the sake of, the mitzvah itself. He's doing it because he himself believes it's a good thing to do. Right? That was really the question. If someone believes that, they want to work on bad character traits, they want to help others, whatever the case may be, do they get any credit for doing it only because they think it's a good thing to do? In other words, they take God right out of the picture. They're doing it only because, I don't know, their heart tells them to do it. Right? They say I should help Granny cross the street. Okay. So too by the Noahide laws, any non-Jew doesn't convert, is not interested in converting, that's fine. But any non-Jew, the Rambam says, you have to believe that God gave, the Noahide laws passed down, gave it to Adam, passed down to Noah, and then it was codified in Mount Sinai. That is taking on the Noahide laws. But if a person would say, I'm going to keep these laws because they're rational, because they're universal, because they make sense, then what's going to happen? They don't get credit for it. It's obvious and all that, very good, right? But they have to believe that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, right? They have to believe that these laws came, to Adam, passed down to Noah, and all that. Otherwise, if they do it on, based on quote unquote their own intellect doesn't do anything over here, right? If they're not stealing or they're not, doing idolatry, whatever, because it makes sense to them, so that's not good enough, right? That's not taking on the Noahide laws, right? So the Rambam clearly holds the laws of kings Rambam makes absolutely clear that the laws themselves have to be taken on because God said so, because God commanded, commanded them to do it. Now, there is a whole question. There is a whole question about whether mitzvahs need intention, right? A Jew who does mitzvahs, do they need intention? So certainly they do, right? And again, we're not talking Kabbalistic intention. General intention. I'm eating the matzah. I'm praying. I'm making a blessing, right? General understanding of what I'm doing, right? Even if you don't necessarily, understand the words or whatever, right? You should have general intention. Now, the question is, what if you didn't? Now, certain things, if you didn't have even general intention, you have to go back and do it again. One example is the first line of the Shema. If you say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? You're declaring God's uniqueness in the world, that there's only one God, and He's the one in charge. Very good. So by doing so, what does it do? Sorry, what should a person's intention be? Right? Very basic intention is you believe in one God. Right? That's your intention. Now, there's another level. That God's the one in charge. That means God's past, present, future. That God knows past, present, future. If a person was just saying the word Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and he had no intention for anything, he wasn't thinking about what he was saying. Got to go back and say it again. Right? Some also say, when you say Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchuso L'Olam Va'ed, that you're going to say that God's kingship lives forever. You're not going to say it out loud. You say it softly. The only time you ever say it out loud is on Yom Kippur, where we're more like angels on Yom Kippur. But that being said, you also have to have intention. You also have to have intention for that. If not, you have to go back and repeat it. What's another example? Another example is Shmona Esrei. Say the silent meditation, Shmona Esrei, or Amidah, whatever you want to call it. You have to have intention at least the first 3 paragraphs, at the very least. And what does the Chofetz Chaim say? What does that intention mean? The intention means I understand what the words mean. Simple explanation. Doesn't matter whatever language you understand, right? You understand what the words mean. So I remember many years ago, so I asked my Rabbi this question, and I said, what should my intention be? What should my intention be during the Shemona Esrei, during silent meditation, whatever you want to call it? So I said, what should my intention be? So he says, what does the Mishnah Berurah say? What does Chofetz Chaim say? Chofetz Chaim says that you should understand the words, right? You should understand what the words mean, right? Basic understanding what the words mean. So I asked them, I said, okay. I said, and? I go, anything else? And he looked at me and goes, no, for you that's enough. Right? For you that's enough. Right? You understand the words. Now, if you don't understand the words, you can say, I'm still in the middle of prayer. Right? Do I get credit for prayer? I don't know. You can have people going through the motions and, going back and forth, but they're not praying because their mind is elsewhere. Right? So here, at least by the first 3 paragraphs, you have to understand what you're saying. Right? If not, you have to go back and say it again. In other words, if you started saying the prayer and your mind wanders, and you're thinking about, you're thinking about your next meal, you're hungry, you're thinking about, where you're going in 20 minutes, you're thinking about whatever it is, but you don't have intention of what you're saying. Even if you say the words, your mind's elsewhere. You got to go back and say it. Right? So there are certain things, intention is crucial, is absolutely crucial. If not, I have to go back. Right? Most things that a person does, even if they had no intention, then they get credit. They get a C-, but they get credit. Now, why do you get credit? Because if we would say that everything you do has to have proper intention, otherwise you get no credit, right? Otherwise you get no credit, what's going to happen? People aren't going to do anything. Going to say, I can only do it, I'm only by a certain level. Or if, if I'm fully prepared, but I'm not fully prepared, so I can't do it. Yeah, then you won't do anything. It's like someone once said, I gave my kids sweaters once during the winter. So, and the sweater said they're made out of wool. Very good. So even if they're made out of wool, you got to get it checked if it says 100% wool. Why? Maybe there's linen. And it's still a prohibition of mixing wool and linen. So I said it's probably not a problem, but I said, I have to take someone get checked. Hopefully it shouldn't be an issue. So they said, why? I said it's Torah prohibition. Torah says, right? I probably said the Bible says you can't wear wool and linen together. So they asked me, what's the reason? I said, it's a good question. It's a reason. It's one of the laws we don't normally understand. We call it a chok, right? Just like the red heifer, right? The red heifer, we don't understand, fully. Certainly a lot of the mitzvahs in the Torah, but the red heifer is a very good example. Because here you took a, cow was totally red, never worked, right? And so it became impure. So you burn the cow, you take the ashes, takes the ashes, sprinkles it on the cow. Person becomes impure. Sorry, the person who's impure becomes pure. The Kohen who's pure now becomes impure. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Right? It's illogical. Many mitzvahs in the Torah, right, seem to be illogical. Doesn't mean we don't have to try and understand them. Okay. But even if that is the case, I said there are things we don't understand, right? But we have to do them anyway. So the person said, well, if there's no real reason, then why would I keep it? Good question. So I asked them, if I would give you 10 reasons, would you keep it? They said, well, it depends. Depends on what the reason is. So of course, a person can say, this doesn't resonate with me. This isn't, according to my world outlook. This is, something else. Oh, you give me this answer, it's Webster's fifth definition. So you can say, I don't believe in any of them. Okay, so you won't do anything. Right? You'd be so quote unquote philosophical, you knock out all these ideas because they don't resonate. Now, do we care if the Torah resonates or not? If it makes sense or not, you still have to keep it. Now, does that mean we don't have to understand it? No. We have to do the best, best of our ability, to understand it. And even if we come up to certain conclusions, doesn't mean it's the reason. There could be, any number of reasons, for the mitzvahs, in the Torah. And there are mitzvahs in the Torah make more sense, right? Are more logical, but again, they can be more complex. They can be more complex at the same time, meaning that, the Torah says don't steal. Okay, how much? What if it's someone who has plenty of money? What if a person stole, let's say, from Uncle Sam? You want to pay less taxes, takes too much. Right? What about if you stole on condition to return it? Torah doesn't tell me. Right? So, okay. So we have to think, we have to understand, what's going on over here. So there are things that, that make more sense, right? Torah says don't kill. Very good. What about self-defense? That murder. What about euthanasia? What about abortion? Torah doesn't tell me, right? Torah doesn't give me any answers. It just says you're not allowed to. Okay. But there are a lot of different cases that can come up that, we're gonna have to try and figure out, is it logical, does it apply or doesn't apply? Right? That's why a lot of these things beg for, for oral law, right? We need an explanation over here. So in general, again, even with all the explanations, the rabbis give doesn't mean it's the explanation. Could be, doesn't mean, doesn't mean that they didn't reveal everything, right? They revealed some things and covered up many other things. So it's their I don't know, things not reasons, right? That's what if you read the Rambam's book, the Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed. That's what he did. He tried to find reasons, for the mitzvahs. Again, is the Rambam the sole authority over here on the reasons for the mitzvahs? No, plenty of others. Try to come up with reasons, for the mitzvahs. But in general, if we would look at the mitzvahs, As Ramosha Feinstein says, the blessed memory, when Torah Giants, the last generation of America, would have been Torah Giants anywhere, pretty much. His commentary on Chumash, it brings down a Parshas Korach. How did Korach make such a mistake? Korach wasn't a fool. Korach had, he saw Samuel the prophet's going to come out of him, right? He came out of Egypt, he held the ark, he didn't die. So Ramosha Feinstein says, what happened over here? He didn't internalize the message. In other words, if he would have understood everything as a law, we don't understand. Everything, meaning everything's a divine command. If everything's a divine command, you won't make any mistakes. Why won't you make any mistakes? Because you understand, God said, okay, I have to understand it. I have to understand what he means, what he wants. Okay. But even if that is the case, I still have to work hard. But I have to understand it's a divine command. Right? And if we would understand that all these things are divine commands, whether you understand better, you understand worse, really doesn't matter. But the fact is that if they're all divine commands, then why are you looking for leniency? Why are you going to give Webster's fifth definition? God said I have to do it. Okay. Yeah, so if I understand the divine command, then I got to keep it. I got to keep it no matter what. Someone, all right, let's take some questions here. Someone says, read somewhere, resurrection of the dead will take 210 years, which means that Mashiach will have to come by the year 2030. The idea, first of all, the Messiah has to come before the year 6000, right? So you got another 200 odd years before the Messiah has to come. Now, the question is going to be, the Messiah will come either way. Either if we're totally meritorious, then everything is good. We'll be, playing the banjo, singing Kumbaya, everything will be beautiful, right? If not, then, as Gemara says, God will bring an evil king like Haman, Mr. Haman himself, and everyone's going to repent, and the Messiah will come, kind of a nasty way. Okay, but in either case, the world's only going to exist for 6,000 years. Now, the question's going to be, within those 200 some odd years, when the Messiah comes. So let's say the Messiah comes, I don't know, before the end of 6,000 years. When is Olam Haba? When is considered the next world? And when is the resurrection of the dead? Right? It's a good question. Yeah, very, very good question. What's the answer? Difference of opinion, right? There's a difference of opinion across the board. Some say Olam Haba will take place after the Messiah comes. Yeah, after the Messiah comes, the world gets destroyed, and then there's the resurrection of the dead. It would make sense that resurrection of the dead comes later, right? First of all, it has to come after the Messiah. It cannot come before, right? That would not make any sense. The Messiah has to come before that, right? So the Messiah will come, do what he needs to do, rebuild the temple. The Messiah will ingather the exiles, right? Certain things he's got to do. So the Messiah will come. Now the question's going to be, resurrection. Is that going to happen straight after? Or is it going to happen after the world's destroyed? New world will be created, right? Be 1,000 years in between. And it seems from the Gemara and other sources that, I don't know, people will be floating around and flying around, who knows what, for 1,000 years. World gets recreated. When the world gets recreated, then you have that great judgment, right? That would make the most sense. I would think it would make the most sense, because if the world's going to get destroyed, what's the point of resurrection if the world's going to get destroyed, right? And then God's going to rebuild the world, right? Seemingly it should be after. But again, there's a major difference of opinion, right? There's a major difference of opinion when that's going to happen. So the question is that the Mashiach will have to come by the year 2030. I don't know why by 2030, right? Maybe 2230. Yeah, but you get another 200 years, right? You got another 200 some odd years. So you're talking about 23, whatever it is, right? So resurrection of the dead will take 210 years. I don't know. Never heard of that. But I would think it would take shorter than that. I don't think it should have to take that long. because obviously God knows it's going to be resurrected, right? And who's not, and it's very hard to imagine. It's very hard to imagine there's going to be tens of millions of people, right? Anyone did idolatry, they never repented, they're out, right? So that's most of the known world, right? That's most of the known world right now. And even if you say, Islam, is not idolatry, right? Most likely, they're all going to be wiped out also. They shouldn't get up a resurrection of the dead because it's false religion, right? You can't go against prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. So in that case, they're also wiped out. You knock out the Hindus, that's half of the world, right? So how many people are going to get up a resurrection of the dead? Like, I don't know. I find it hard to believe there's going to be tens of millions of people. I could be wrong. I could certainly be wrong. But certainly not all Jews are going to get up. If a person, is holding my Torah mitzvahs at some level, yeah, they should get up. And if you're not, then not only shouldn't you have a portion of the world to come, why should you get up? And even if you got a portion of the world to come, I would think that's a pretty good guarantee that you should get up a resurrection. Because if you already have a portion of the world to come, if you already have a portion of the world to come, you had to reach a certain level. So I would think if you reach that level, then that person should get up a resurrection. Right? That's what I would think. But if you don't, if you don't meet the minimal criteria, and the Ramchal brings us down in Derech Hashem, in the way of God, he makes very clear. He doesn't tell you what the minimal criteria is, but he says there's a minimal criteria a person has to do in order to reach in order to get a portion of the world to go. Yeah. So he doesn't tell us what that is. Now, if a person reaches that minimal criteria, very good. So your soul gets purged. After your soul gets purged of all the terrible things it did, it'll have a portion of the world to come. That's very good, right? That is very good. At the end of the day, what's going to happen? I would think, again, someone who got a portion of the world to come, when that great day, as the prophet says, when that great day of resurrection comes, they should get up. That's what I would think. If you didn't get a portion of the world to come, you ain't getting up a resurrection. All right, doesn't make any sense. If God doesn't want to see you in the next world, why does he want to, in the spiritual world, why would he want to resurrect you? Right? You're just going to, rot. That's it. Bones, you're nothing. Finished. Won't get up. Right? So that's what I would, that's what I would say about that. Right? And someone here says, very good. Those who say don't know, and those who know don't say. Right? Right? There, again, coming the Messiah, it's all clouded in what's it called? It's all clouded in secrecy, right? Contradictions amongst the, amongst the writings of the prophets, right? How it's going to happen, and and all that. And that's why the Rambam said you shouldn't calculate it. Try and calculate when you think the Messiah is going to come, based on the verses. You make a mistake, you say, oh, you make a mistake, and you're going to say, well, the Messiah should have come. He didn't come. I'm not going to keep Torah mitzvahs, right? So it doesn't matter. Essentially, it doesn't matter. However, the Messiah is going to come, and whatever's going to happen, we still have an obligation, best of our ability, to keep Torah mitzvahs, regardless, right? Regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what we think. It's an interesting topic. Yeah? Very, very interesting topic. Practically speaking, no ramifications at all. None. I mean, you have to believe for a Jew, one of the 13 principles of faith is, I believe in perfect faith the Messiah is going to come, right? So every Jew has to believe in that. And if you don't believe in that, or any of the 13 principles, you lose your status as a Jew unless you repent. These are major tenets: resurrection of the dead, coming of the Messiah, reward and punishment. God is absolute, Moses greatest of all prophets. These are things. These are things you got to believe. These are things you got to believe. If not, you lose your status as a Jew unless you repent. Now, the question is at what level the person has to believe, right? What does the Rambam say? Even if the Messiah tarries, right, and he's delayed, I still believe with perfect faith. Okay, now what does that mean? What does that mean? I believe with perfect faith. Does it mean it's just a nice thought that I think it's going to happen, and whenever it happens, it happens? Or as my Rabbi brings down from Yechezkel Abramsky, who has a memory. He was head of Beis Din in London, one of the Torah giants of the last generation, and lived in Israel as well at the end of his life. So he said it's like, you have an appointment with someone at 9 o'clock. Like you're waiting for that person at 9 o'clock. That's what it means to wait. Right? It's like you have an important meeting. So when you have an important meeting, or you're meeting someone, at a specific time, that's what it means to wait. Let me just think about it, whatever. It means, it means you're waiting. So, there are different levels here. Okay. But at the end of the day, if you deny any of them, if you deny any of these principles, then that's it. Unless the person repents, you're out. Right? You don't believe in reward and punishment, God forbid. Or you don't believe in resurrection of the dead. Come on, really? Think this, that? The major tenets. These are major tenets of Judaism. How it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, okay. That's a whole discussion. Yeah? That's definitely a whole discussion. But you got to believe in it. Now, what about non-Jews? What about non-Jews? Pick on all you non-Jews out there. So they have to believe in these principles? No. Is it a good thing? I would think it's a good thing for them to believe in them, but they don't have to. Right? It's not crucial. Not crucial for them. Someone here says you keep mitzvahs because you trust in Hashem. You keep mitzvahs because you believe it's true. That's why you keep mitzvahs. Yeah, you keep your mitzvahs because God said to do it. Right? So similar thing. Right? That you believe God knows what He's doing. Yeah, yeah. In other words, if not, as we said before, a lot of these things don't make sense rationally. They don't make sense rationally. Again, I still have to try and understand it, right? To the best of my ability. There's no question. But, God has a track record. And even if things are hard and even if life is difficult, it doesn't really matter, right? I have to keep Torah mitzvahs to the best of my ability. That's it. Regardless what goes on around me, right? We've spoken about that a lot. Let me take some other, 1 second here. Let me take some other questions here. Somebody asks, okay, it's recommended to take a Hebrew name during the process of conversion. You can. You don't have to do it at the end. You can certainly, choose a biblical name or whatever. You can certainly do that while going through conversion. That's not a problem. You can wait till the end. You don't have to. You certainly don't. You certainly don't have to. Even a person at the beginning of the process, they can do it. What's the problem, right? A person's committed. They want to use a Hebrew name, right? It's not a problem. Some people may say, until a person's like, right before conversion, then they should use that name. I don't know. Same thing about dressing up as a Jew. Yeah. Some people will say very strongly, you don't dress up a Jew until right before conversion. But how are you going to learn how to do it and know what it is if you don't do it before? If you don't do it well before, it's going to be hard to do it before. If you do it at the last second. Like any of the mitzvahs. It's like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. I won't keep Shabbos, I won't do other things, until right before conversion. But again, how are you going to know what to do if you don't start? You got to start at some point. Yeah, some people start earlier, in the middle, I don't know, whatever it is. Right? Everything a JIT, a Jew in training, as I would say, that they're going to do, is a stepping stone, is a building block. That's very good. You can't do everything all at once. Okay. But if you don't practice, how are you going to know how to do it? Right? So if you don't, practice dressing the part, again, certain things you can't do. Okay. But, person wants to practice dressing the part, why not? Other people, I've heard other people say, not at all. They should look like Jews, give us a bad name because they're not really Jewish and this. Okay, I hear that. But if they want to do it, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. They want to play the part, very good. They'll tell people, I'm not Jewish yet. Okay. So why do you want to play the part? Because it's a lot easier when you start doing things at an earlier time than trying to take it on right before. Right? You be consistent doing it. Should a rabbi choose it for me? No, not necessarily. Right? I would say it's better. It's better to choose a biblical name. Definitely against that. There are others that say, you want to take on a name, but there should be if a person has an offense to a certain name, it's a biblical name, they want to take it on. If you want to ask, you want to ask a rabbi, is it good to take on this name? Not a good thing. Okay, you can do that. They don't have to choose it for you. But the person can choose it. The person can certainly choose it themselves if they want to get advice. If they think it's a good name, okay, that is a different, different issue, right? So when it mentions, okay, their name is Christian attachments, okay, yeah. A person should have a Jewish name. I don't, if they're going to convert, they should have a Jewish name, right? Shouldn't go by their non-Jewish name, regardless if it has Christian affinity or other affinity. Right? It doesn't really matter. Christian, Muslim, Hindu, whatever. So yeah. So if a person's going to be a Jew, he should have a Jewish name for sure, right? For sure. Someone asked, "Or anyone doesn't keep the Torah?" Jews? If you're asking about Jews, there are 13 million Jews that don't keep Torah, right? There are a lot of Jews that don't keep Torah, so I'm not sure the question. I mean, there are plenty of Jews out there. The majority of Jews, 90% or more of the Jews, don't know the alphabet. They don't know anything from nothing, right? So you're asking me, are there Jews that don't keep Torah? Plenty. Yeah. Are there Orthodox Jews don't do what they're supposed to do? Yeah. We got bad eggs among us also. That's true. We have to be held to a higher standard. But most Jews don't do anything. There are a lot of Jews not affiliated with the synagogues. They don't keep anything. They don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep kosher. They don't, nothing. They do nothing. They don't mean anything to them, or they've been taught, or whatever. All right. Let me see. Someone here asked. 1 second. Pinchas executed Zimri. Right. Right. He executed Zimri. And that woman, Cosby Batsur, right, Midianite princess, right? They got shish kebabbed, my language. I understand why Zimri had to be executed. However, why was the woman also executed? Because she was the one involved in it. Right? Well, in other words, can ask the same question, similar question, a person did something wrong, or let's say better, a person had an animal caused damage, or let's say an animal killed someone. So you put the animal dies, and the owner, right, will have to pay restitution. Doesn't mean he's going to die per se, right? He might have to pay serious restitution if he was negligent. But why does the animal die? Right? In other words, if, let's make it clear. If the animal is properly guarded and the animal somehow got out of its cage, right, but it was properly guarded, so okay. That's done by accident because it was proper guarding. If, let's say, the owner did not properly guard the animal caused damage, he's negligent, right? 100%, he's negligent. Now, in such a case, why is the animal dying? Right? Why is the animal dying? Right? Or in a case, let's say, bestiality. Yeah? Why is the animal dying? Certainly not the animal's fault. Right? Animals not, try and entice a human. I mean, it's kind of a strange thing, but obviously Torah says it's forbidden. So obviously people must have done it. I don't know what the stats are, but it must exist. Must exist at some level. So even not very common, it's certainly not a natural desire by any stretch. But okay, let's say, why is the animal dying? Why is the animal killed? The animal was acted upon. Right? The Ramchal says very clear in Derech Hashem, we humans are the only ones that act upon others. Animals cannot act upon a person. Yeah, they could attack you. They can do other things. That's only based on instinct. If God wants to use them to get to you, he can use them like a stick to get to you. Okay. But every other thing, animals, plants, whatever it is, they are acted upon by humans. Very good. So you're going to say, what does the animal do? Why is the animal supposed to die? So what's the answer? Because if you left the animal alive, They're gonna say, "Oh, look," and the person who did the action, what's the penalty? Death penalty, right? Death penalty. Now, so the owner of this animal, or he's not the owner, it doesn't really matter, right? But this guy gets death penalty, right? He gets a death penalty for doing the jitterbug with an animal. Okay, right? We'll keep this clean. Very good. So if he gets killed, you got to kill the animal also. Now, why? The animal doesn't have free choice over here. You're acting on the animal. Very good. You're acting on the animal. Okay. So what's the reason? Because people are going to say, "Oh, look, that was Ruvain's cow." And poor Ruvain got killed because of what he did with the cow. Yeah. So people are going to start talking, and people are going to say, "Oh, look, this guy, you leave this cow alive. It's like a remnant of what Ruvain did. Very good. But Ruvain's no longer in the world." Right? They're going to say, "Well, it's not so bad. He's already dead. He already got his punishment." Very good. Only problem is this cow's running around. No pun intended. This cow's running around. And it's the cow that Ruvain, did whatever he did with. That's bad. That's embarrassment to the person. I can tell him he's dead. You can tell him he's dead. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he's dead or not. The animal gets punished. The animal dies. I would say better. The animal dies also because it's too much embarrassment for the person, even if he's dead. Right? So now you tell me, okay, he caused me, but Sword didn't deserve it. Right? She didn't deserve to die. It's not her fault. But guess what? Guess what? That's what the punishment is. If she's involved, she makes a desecration of God's name with him, even though, really desecration of God's name does not apply to a non-Jew. Nonetheless, you're not going to leave her alive, right? Why aren't you going to leave her alive? So Pinchas kills Zimri, and she's left alive. Same thing. I'm not comparing her to an animal. I'm just saying. I mean, what she did, if she's alive, people are going to say, "Oh, look, look, Cosby this, Cosby that. Oh, poor Zimri, look what happened to him." It's embarrassment, total embarrassment. Okay, let's be understood what was going on there. We can say, "Well, it was just base desire." Yeah, well, deeper things going on there also. Whatever it was, but still, that's not something that should have been, something should have been done. You see by the story of Yosef and Potiphar's wife. Now, Potiphar's wife saw, according to astrology, that someone, either her or her daughter, was supposed to be with Yosef and have children. Now, she made a mistake. It wasn't her; it was her daughter. But okay. But even so, the commentaries say, even if she thought it was her, even if she thought she was supposed to have children with him, very good, and she was supposed to be with him, very good. What's the problem? It's not a way to do it. It's certainly not a modest way to do it. Yeah. All right, she made a mistake. Very good. Right? She made a mistake. She read the planets wrong. She read the whole thing wrong. Okay. I mean, she was off. Very good. The fact is, she was doing it not just to try and entice him, right? You look at the story again. You gotta look at what's really going on, what's going on behind the scenes. But even so, even if that was the case, even if it would have been true that she was supposed to be with him and she was supposed to have children through him, and that's what she saw with the future. Very good. Even if that would be true, is that the way to do it? That's not necessarily the way to do it. Yeah, not so modest way to do it, but think about this. After all said and done, he gets thrown in the dungeon, right? He comes out and he saves the day, in Egypt. And who does he end up marrying? Their daughter. He marries Potiphar's daughter. So imagine what kind of, what kind of family structure this is. Yeah, after what his mother-in-law does. Right? Let's say better. What she did. Now she understood she made a mistake. Yeah, she made a serious mistake over here. Okay. Yeah, so imagine those family dynamics. Hard to imagine. Hard to imagine those family dynamics. Yeah, yeah, birthday parties, other things, and his mother-in-law's there. She's looking at him, he's looking at her like, oh, can't imagine. Right? Can't imagine what that family structure is like. So I once saw, I'll bring a proof over here. Not really a proof, but someone many, many years ago, whatever, TV was on, and it was Oprah. Yeah, Oprah back in the day. And she was interviewing three people. There was a guy and two women. So this guy, and again, you can't even make this stuff up. This guy was married to somebody. Yeah. He divorced his wife and married his mother-in-law. Now, can you imagine the family dynamic in such a place? They're just asking all the questions like, how do you all get along? Like all these different things. And I'm sitting there like, people, there are a number of forbidden relationships, right? Torah brings down in whatever in the book of Leviticus. I'm going to get there one day. I don't know when, right? But in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18, that person can't be with his daughter-in-law and can't uncover the naked of his daughter-in-law or mother-in-law. I say, come on, mother-in-law is older. This, that. Like, why do you think these laws are there? That it's forbidden. You gotta say, wow, how common is it? It can happen. It can sure happen. There are stories of brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws. There are definitely stories like that. Their affairs and different things. But, it's kind of a crazy dynamic, right? So, you say the mother-in-law is like, maybe 20, 25 years older, than his ex-wife. So it's like he's with his mother-in-law, he's with his mother-in-law, and so has connections, to his ex-wife because that's his wife's daughter. Like, it's very strange. Yeah. Very, very strange. Now, imagine the family dynamics, such a case. Imagine. Yeah, I don't think they had kids. Imagine if they would have had kids. A crazy thing, right? So, say, oh, it's only an Oprah, this, that. These things happen. These things happen. It doesn't have to be someone like so old either. The person can be 20 years older. Okay. Whatever it is. Very good. But I think it's a weird dynamics. So people say, oh, come on, these type of relationships. The Torah knew. Torah knew very clear what it was talking about. Yeah, and the rabbis made decrees, and many things. They also knew. They also knew the psyche of man, right? Even if something can say it's so far-fetched and this and that, like, how could anything ever happen? It could happen. It sure could happen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the plausibility is. It doesn't matter if it's 1 in 10,000 or you'll tell me it's like 1 in a billion chance something's going to happen. The fact is, it's happened, right? Fact is, it's been proven it can happen, right? If they want to say it's far-fetched or not, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it possibly could happen. You make a decree, so it won't happen, right? But the Torah makes very clear, right? A person can't be with their mother-in-law. Like, all those mother-in-law jokes, they're true, right? Most of them. Yeah. So, like, kind of strange. That person, would have desire with with their mother-in-law or with their father-in-law. Yeah, very strange. Can it happen? Oh, it can happen. Yeah, for sure it can happen. Strange. Right? But you're not going to leave someone alive, right? This is the mentality. You're not going to leave someone alive who's going to embarrass the other person even after they died. Right? But you're going to say, oh, look, this person around, oh, look at, so-and-so, oh, poor Zimri, look what happened to him. So it's a reminder, it's embarrassment. Doesn't matter if he's dead or not. It's embarrassment for his name. Because that's the only thing that matters in this world, is what we do. Right? The person's name is worth everything. But here he got slaughtered. No pun intended. Shish kebab, my language. Yeah? Yeah, but you got to leave her alive? Why'd you leave her alive? Right? For the same reason as the animal. You're not going to leave them alive. It's embarrassment. Total embarrassment for the person. After they're dead. Total reputation destroyed. Well, it's destroyed anyway, but think of this. The Gemara says many, many miracles. What Pinchas did, when he killed them, What would happen if in self-defense, Zimri stopped him and killed him? Would Zimri be liable over here? No. Why would he be liable? Because Pinchas had the status of a rodef. He had the status of a pursuer. And a pursuer, you do whatever you can to stop them, even if you have to kill them. Right? So a pursuer in Jewish law, you kill. Right? In the case of a woman is pregnant and the child is killing the woman, you kill the child. Right? You go after what the potential is now, not future potential. Right? Against the Christian, to the opposite. Someone's asked me this many years ago. And, many, many years ago, this question. And whatever, that's the answer. So why is it by the Catholic Church, the person was a non-Jew, obviously, and, I was, still in the process of becoming religious, and that was the question. Why, according to us, why would the mother have to die, right? In other words, if a woman is, serious issues, and the child is causing it to, the child will kill the mother, let's say, right? So according to Christianity, it's the opposite. You kill the mother. You save the child, and the mother dies. Now, what's the reason? Right? So according to them, they're going according to potential right now. What's the potential right? Or future potential. What's the future potential? Future potential is a child. Child's got a much greater chance to survive. The woman's older, whatever, it doesn't matter how old. Right? So, they're in danger of future potential. We go according to potential right now. What's the potential right now? Is the mother. So you don't, you kill the child, save the mother. Right? That would be the case. That would be the case with that. Someone asks, someone says, men sleep with their mother-in-law sick. You're right. You're right. What's worse, right? I always get these questions. Is this person worse than this person, right? So we'll say, what's worse? What's worse? Somebody who sleeps with their mother-in-law or bestiality? Yeah, I would think bestiality is worse, right? My own personal opinion, I think it's they're both death penalty, right? They're both death penalty in general. But why is it worse? Why is it worse? For us, it's totally not natural, right? Totally not natural. Yeah, for someone to be the mother, I would agree. It's pretty sick. But I think being with an animal, that's in a different category altogether. That's a totally different category. But it is in the within the same verse. I think with the what do you call it, homosexuality also, or the verse before. Right, so it's it's also not a normal thing. People say I'm attracted to men. That's part of my psyche. Whatever. They'll say I got this gene. Okay, it's an unnatural desire. Certainly according to the Torah, and that's all we care about. It's an unnatural desire. Because if people would act on that, and that was the natural desire, you wouldn't have kids in the world. You wouldn't have a next generation if you would follow through with that. But even so, the Torah makes very clear, cleave to your wife. Then the Torah says later, right, that it shouldn't have, a person shouldn't be homosexual. What are my thoughts on atheists? I think most people, see, if they're honest and they say, I'm agnostic, I'm not sure if there's a God. I'm not sure if there's a God. Yeah, okay. I got respect for that, but I would say I don't believe they've checked into things. They just, they're just saying, okay, I'm not an atheist. There might be a God. There might be a God. But, whether, that's being more honest than I think being an atheist. Because someone says, I'm an atheist, like hardcore. I don't believe in anything. Okay. Did you ever study any philosophy? Aristotle, Socrates? No. Did you ever study later philosophy? Kant, Kierkegaard? No. Lavdil, make a big distinction. Did you ever study, Jewish philosophy? The Rambam? Yehuda Levi? The Ramchal? No. Did you ever read the Bible from cover to cover? Nobody saw the movie. Okay, so how can you be an atheist? You're an idiot. Essentially, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about philosophy. You never looked into anything. He's not profuse like, I don't believe anything. It's very easy to prove that this world's a world by design. That's how Abraham came on the scene at the age of 40 or the age of 3 or older. So he can't. So he said there's a world of design. There's an obligation to serve that designer, i.e., God. Right now, there's so many things in nature, and in the human body, to see that there's order, there's design. Yeah, no, a person can say that's nature. Very good. Where did nature come from? Why is it when a guy's with a woman, all things being equal, they're together and they can conceive a child? Well, that's natural. Very good. So you can say it's biology 101. We'll keep this clean, right? You got the sperm, hits the egg. Very good. All things being equal, it's gonna be a child. Gonna have five hands, five fingers on each hand, and toes and everything. You can say that's nature. That's nature. I take a peach pit, or peach pit is a good example. A cow, no animal can eat it. They won't eat it. Human break their teeth on it. Yeah, but if I put it in the ground is able to absorb it. Dissect it, demolish it, destroy it, whatever you want to call it. Water, sunlight, that's going to grow into a tree. Plenty of peaches. All things being equal. Same thing with an apple seed. Right? Same thing with other types of seeds. But now, why should that be? So you tell me, very simple. That's the nature of the seed. That's the DNA. How'd it get like that? Random? Through evolution? Where did it get that way? Right? I'm pretty convinced most people, I heard a statement, I don't know where it came from, but I heard a statement when I was in university and college that 1% of the people think, 4% think they think, 95% rather die than think. Now, who are the big thinkers out there? These atheists, like really big thinkers, like these big professors, like the really big thinkers, not big thinkers. They want to say, well, there's no God, I don't have to do anything. I'm not liable to do anything. I can do what I want, and everything's random. Everything's random? The whole world is random? There's no order whatsoever? Because once you start saying there's order, yeah, there's design, you're going to have to come on to the fact that either evolution, or you're going to have to come on to the Bible, for creation. But I don't believe for a second most of these people have ever thought about it. Now, some people say I'm an atheist because, I had a parent that suffered. I had a grandfather that suffered, or, whatever it is. They went through a very hard time. Okay. They say, they're angry at God. So they say, I don't believe in God because this shouldn't happen. Okay. They have an issue with suffering. Okay. Yeah, I get it. And they had a rough life, and and all that, and how could it be? Okay, right? That might be true. That might be true. Yeah. Does that mean that the whole world is random? I mean, come on, most scientists don't believe in evolution. Right? Most scientists don't believe in evolution. And even, Einstein and Stephen Hawking mentions many times, proved through math and physics, that that's an expanding universe, but they don't have an answer how. Right? They just say, well, we're not going to look at the creationist, but we'll find an answer. But they don't have an answer. They have no answer. Why it's still expanding? What's continued to expand? So that's cognitive dissonance. They prove that through math and science. So if they were sitting in front of me, a little bit chutzpah, I'd say, Al, Steve, very good. I said, you believe and you prove through science and math, no question about it. Others say the same thing. The universe expanding. Great. Can you explain to me through math and science, physics, how that works? No. But we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way. Okay. I got one other possible way, right? You got two other possibilities. One of them is evolution, which they're probably not going to hold up, right? In different ways. Or you have to come on to say that the creationists are right. That the creationist, the story of the Bible of creation has to be a viable explanation. No, we'll never believe that. Okay, let's start this conversation again. Right? Do you have any answer at all? According to science? No, you don't have an answer. So you have to entertain the possibility. Right? There's only one other possibility, that everything's random. Right? And all these mutations or whatever. Right? Which they're probably not going to hold them. So there's only one other possibility. But Stephen Hawking himself, as great as he was, I mean, absolute heretic, no question. But at the end of his book, A Brief History in Time, he proved this. He proved that that it's expanding, universe is expanding. But he said very clearly, I'm not going back to the Bible. I don't have an answer, but I'm not going back to the Bible. It's cognitive dissonance. totally cognitive dissonance. So anyone wants to be an atheist out there, it's very easy to show, there's a world of design. Now, the person could ask, well, if the world of design, then how do you know it's God? Right? So, okay, then you get another discussion. And then how do you know Judaism is right and everything else is wrong? That's a different discussion. Yeah? But that's where it leads to. That's where it goes. But how many really true atheists are there in the world? I mean, who've seriously gone through serious amount of material, and came to clear conclusions. This is what it is. Maybe there are some that have. I'm convinced it's just a thing to say, and they don't, say I don't believe in anything anyway, whatever. But they never thought about it, right? They never ever thought about it. Most people. That's my guess. Yeah, because I don't want to think about it. It's just easier to say. Yeah, I don't believe in anything. It could be for any number of reasons, but did they really study it? They really looked into it? It's like the whole thing. Just study philosophy? No. Medieval philosophy? No. Jewish philosophy? No. Did you ever read the Bible? No. So you can't be an atheist. You're an idiot. You didn't look into it. You didn't delve into it. You want to delve into it. You want to try and understand it. Very good. You don't want to look at any of the sources, which is probably most people. Yeah. So that I wouldn't have any respect for. You want to argue? You want to say, I came to this conclusion, that conclusion, whatever. We'll have a discussion. Maybe a short discussion. Yeah. Are they intellectually honest? No. Most people aren't. I met one. As I always say, I met one in the last 30 years. Probably 32 years. I met one person. That's it. Everyone else got their own crazy ideas about things. I met one person. This person said, less than 30 years ago, probably 25 years ago, 27 years ago, let's say. But this person said, married to a non-Jew, Jew married to a non-Jew, says, if I look into Judaism and I find out it's true, I'm not going to change. I will not change, so I'm not going to look into it. Okay, they're honest. They're honest. Everyone else comes up with their crazy ideas. How they think, the world came about and this, and I think this, and I think that. Okay, let them think what they want. Leave your mind open till your brains fall on the floor. But who's really intellectually honest? Who's really searching? People are searching are going to get to the truth. They will get to the truth. They might get being misguided. It might take them a long time. But they'll get to the truth. Because, as the Gemara says, if you want to go on the right path, God will help you. You want to go on the wrong path, He won't stop you. Right? But you have an opportunity. Everyone's got an opportunity. But yeah, you can also make a mistake as well. So it asks, can a person eat from restaurants owned by a non-Jew? So that's the whole question. If it's kosher, who's cooking there? Does that have rabbinic supervision? Even if it's a vegetarian place. Yeah, so you got a problem, at the very least, even if it's totally vegetarian, you got a problem with bugs. And eating a bug is worse than eating pork, which most people are not aware of, because eating a bug could be 5, 6 prohibitions in one shot. Eating pig is one. Right? Now you can say pig only has one character trait that makes it that's kosher, and the other one isn't. Right? You have to have split hooves in a chewed cut, so it's got one and not the other. Okay. That's only one prohibition. Yeah, eating an insect could be 5 or 6 prohibitions. Right? So it's definitely worse. What are the rules about how to relate to Christian birth family for us to convert in Judaism? You have to start talking to them. What about honoring your parents? This is the problem. It depends. It depends. I wouldn't say you have to cut off relationships straight away. I would say it depends. Because if they're Bible thumpers, let's say, every time you speak to them, it's all about you're going to find hell forever, this and that. It's uncomfortable. So you can say, you try to bring your proofs, they don't want to listen, you go back and forth. Finally, you can say, listen, you want to talk about other things? We're not talking about this. If they continue to harp on this, then you got to make a choice. Yeah, you got to put your foot down, and you have to say, listen, we're not going down this path anymore. You want to talk about other things? Good. I'm not discussing this, right? I'm not discussing this. Now, if they don't give you a hard time, then, I wouldn't say there's a reason to break off from them. Right? If they're not giving you a hard time, what would be the, I don't think there's any point. I don't think there's any point to break off from them. Only if they're giving you a hard time. Now, in most cases, probably family goes out the window. at some point. Right? It's been my experience that I think that is the case because, just too many conflicts. And people are not, they're not, live and let live. No, because they're going to think what you represent. And because of what you represent, so to speak, is bad, right? And goes against their values. It's not going to have much to do with you. They'll ostracize you. Now, does that happen in every case? I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say in every case like that. Some people are very open. Some people, maybe will ask questions or whatever, and it's not going to affect the relationship. But I think in most cases it does. Most cases it probably does. In most cases, I would think a person is going to, not going to have too much to do with family. Now, the question is, do you have to stop talking to them? No. What about honoring your parents? So, if the parents, let's say, you have a good relationship with them, then you should honor them, right? Honor them, you should do. That'd be a big sanctification of God's thing, because just because you came to a different religion and like they think you're totally out to lunch, but you still have a connection to them and you still respect them and whatever. So, that's a huge thing. On the other hand, if if they're evil, and it's a toxic relationship. So honoring them, you don't have to. Certainly you don't have to honor them. Stand up for them, let's say they walk in a room or something like that. That you don't have to do, right? But you gotta be careful what you say to them. You can't contradict them. You can't, embarrass them in public. I mean, certain things you can't do. Even if they're evil, you're not allowed to. Now you tell me, well, they did this, they did that, they did the other thing. Okay, but remember, even if the relationship is toxic, you don't have to have anything to do with them, right? And that's the best honor you can do because there's no point, right? There's really no point. Now, I don't think most people, are so evil, but it comes with a lot of baggage, and therefore it makes it hard. It makes it very hard. It doesn't have to be, but in a lot of cases, uh, it's probably better not to have too much, contact. So, and someone once asked me, like, would you tell people, to break off, relationships? I said, depends. Certainly depends. If let's say, you have family members that are Bible thumpers, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be, very hard. So, you have to, you have to nip it in the bud, right? You got 100%, you have to nip it in the bud because there's no point. There's no point over here because it's going to be annoying. And every time it's going to get in arguments, and if they're Bible thumpers, you're never going to convince them because they're so closed-minded. They keep saying the same things over and over again. They're not listening to what the truth is. Yeah, but I don't listen to rabbis. Yeah, and I hold Isaiah 53 is the Jewish people aren't righteous, so can't be talking about them. Must be talking about Jake. Like they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen. So it depends. Depends how much a person values the relationship, right? Now, if you can get around that, let's say they weren't religious too much, and okay, so that's better. It's a lot easier. Right. So, but again, the more a person gets into it, I would say the harder it is to find common ground. And if you didn't, if you weren't so close in the first place, then it's going to make it worse. It's going to make it a lot worse. But again, I'm not saying it has to. It depends on the particular case, right? But it's been my experience that most people have very little to do with family. That's just what it is. Someone asks. Someone's born from a forbidden relationship, any kind. Can that person be important in history? Sure. Why not? If a person, let's say a Jew was born from a forbidden relationship, right? Makes them a mamzer, right? Whatever. It's two people that are forbidden to be together, and they have a child. Now, who can that child marry? That child can only marry someone of the same union and or a convert. Now, most of these cases probably don't have many cases like that because even if a person was someone else, it's not a real marriage because they don't have real witnesses and other things. So probably a lot of those cases go out the window. But the Gemara brings very clear brings very clear someone of that relationship can reach the highest levels. Yeah. In other words, let's say you have a mamzer, someone like that, who's a big rabbinic scholar, come in front of a Kohen, right? He gets certain honors in front of a Kohen who doesn't know very much. You gotta say, hi, but he's got a pedigree, very good, but he doesn't know very much. Even if he's got a very high, he's got a high pedigree, right? So, even let's say a person was conceived, a Jew was conceived, and there are no family purity laws. Yeah, can a person reach high spiritual levels? Sure. They have a number of things against them, but they can certainly reach high spiritual levels. So it's not a contradiction. Um, most cultures come from forbidden relationships. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Arabs got all kinds of problems. They get a lot of problems because they have a lot of inbreeding and have all kinds of issues. So yeah, it's not surprising. Messiah will come from a forbidden relationship between Lot and his daughters. Okay, that's true. That is very true. And Ruth comes from them, and Ruth comes from Moab. Very good. So she's a convert. King David comes through her. Very good. Yeah, it's right. It's kind of hard to understand also. Why the future Messiah, even for the Christians, they believe that they go, there's difference of opinion between the Gospels, how they get to King David. Very good. Nonetheless, they also hold that. Right? So, it's kind of strange. It's kind of strange why the Messiah has to come from such a relationship. Someone here asked, 1 second. Can we get a haircut during 3 weeks in order to keep a job? No. Should have got a haircut before. Right? The only thing you could do is if a person has a mustache and mustache gets in the way of food, you could trim it. Right? But for the sake of livelihood, you can't. That would be forbidden. Right? Similar thing. I mean, it's not necessarily getting a haircut. But the Chofetz Chaim makes clear if a person works, for company and they want information, which is Lashon Hara, and you get threatened and they say, listen, if you don't give me this information, we're going to fire you. And, even if you go around collecting money and borrowing money to survive until you get back on your feet, you're not allowed to say Lashon Hara. It's forbidden. Right? So, certain things, no way around. Right? Even to keep a job. Even to keep a job. Now, you could say all these laws of 3 weeks, in the 9 days, many of them, certainly are rabbinical, okay, but even if they are, we still keep them. So I wouldn't see why, I don't see why you would be allowed to. If it's a question, let's say on the intermediate days of a holiday where, people shouldn't shave, let's say, but if they don't, that could cause problems. Then okay, that's different. That might be a different issue. Here it's very hard to get around. Be very hard to get around. Can we skip prayers with men due to mental health issues? Panic attacks, burnout, depression. Yeah. If that's the case, yeah. Or a person's physically sick. Yeah, you can't get to synagogue or whatever. Someone has, let's say, mental health issues or whatever. They're going to be looked at differently. Burnout? I don't know. It's because the person's burnt out doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? You can say, but if I do it, I'm just going to say the word's not going to mean anything. Still get credit for it, right? Still get credit for it. I would say it's better. If a person has burnout, it's still better to try and do it than not do it, because when you don't do it, it has an effect. It certainly has an effect. But you say my heart's not in it. I'm thinking about other things. I only get partial credit. Okay, partial credit is better than getting nothing. Right? It still has an effect on the soul, right? I would say. But if it's caused by mental health issue, that's a different issue. Right? Then that should be okay. Somebody here asks that obviously there's a God. Again, I'm convinced most people don't think. So if they don't think, they never, they're not looking into it. So if they're not looking into it, there's obvious proof. There's obvious proof the world has order, no question. All I have to do is look at nature. Yeah, look at nature and the human body. That's enough. right? That's enough. Someone says, when it comes off rabbi, you know, it's only when the rabbi walked out of water. Okay. So it says, okay. So a person has a good relationship with their family. Good. You know, some people, you know, I always say, like, sometimes family can be an albatross. So, you know, people say, you know, blood is thicker than water. Okay. Doesn't mean anything. If the relationship wasn't good before, it'd be worse now. Definitely be worse now. But if you had a good relationship, there's no reason to cut it off. Right? You know, if you get along or whatever, great. You know, I'm just saying, my experience, you know, a lot of times it's not the case. You know, even a Jewish person becomes religious. Yeah, you get ostracized from family easily. Easily. They think you're different, you're changed, you're this, you're that. Right? So, you know, it's a lot easier if a person didn't have a good relationship with their family. Then, you know, then it just sort of goes by the wayside. So, you know, that's the way it is. It's kind of the way it is. And, you know, and friends and community members will be more like family than family. But if you have a good relationship, there's no reason why to cut it off. Definitely not. Just the opposite. Make a tremendous sanctification of God's name, right? You're showing them respect, showing them honor. Yeah, you know, you do what you can for them, even more than you would before. Like, that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing. Yeah, I'm just saying, in a lot of cases, not that way. A lot of cases, relationships go out the window. Does the Messiah have a convert mother, a non-Jewish male allowed to convert, marry Jewish? The Messiah is going to come from a Jewish. I don't think it's going to come from a convert. Not that I know. It's going to come from, you know, from Jewish parents. It's going to be, you know, it's only going to be a human, no question. No question. You know, let's say you're asking, sorry, if you're asking if his mother was a convert or his father wasn't Jewish. Yeah. Will be allowed to convert and marry a Jewish woman. Why not? Why not? Should be allowed to. You know, are they related then for both parents? If both are Jewish, they should be. If one parent isn't, you know, you're related biologically, right? Let's say a family converts, right? You know, parents, kids convert. Now, technically speaking, the kids are not really their kids, right? Technically speaking, biologically they are. So that would mean if the parent dies, the child doesn't have to say Kaddish for them. No mortars prayers, no nothing, because they're not related spiritually. Yeah. The custom is they do it anyway. That's the custom. Custom is, you know, God forbid a parent dies and, you know, everyone converted, then they definitely sit shiva. They definitely mourn for them and say mourner's prayer. What if the parents are non-Jew? That we don't sit shiva for. You can say Tehillim, you can do other things, you know, say Psalms or whatever, but in general, we don't, you know, there are no, you know, necessarily mourning customs, you know, by them. Um, yeah, just keep in mind one thing. One thing I'll mention is that if a person was you know, let's say the mother was Jewish and the father wasn't, and there was no conversion by the father, right? But even let's say even the father converted, even better. The father converted, but the child was conceived and the father was a non-Jew. Now, technically speaking, the Gemara comes out that a person would go through conversion. Really, that child should be converted because it's got a blemish on the soul because the father wasn't Jewish. Even if the father converts later. Now that's the way it really comes down. But practically speaking, you know, people don't do it. People don't do it. But everyone's told me someone would come in front of his beis din, in front of his rabbinical court, came from such a union, they would tell him to, you know, go in front of 3 people and like take on the mitzvahs again and go through like quote unquote a conversion. If that would be the case, there's a blemish on the soul, right? Someone who's born of Jewish parents, they didn't keep family purity laws, there's also a blemish on the soul. It doesn't mean you can't overcome the blemish, right? That type of person doesn't have to go through conversion, right? Doesn't mean there's a blemish on it. Yeah, sorry, it doesn't mean there's, you know, that person can't be a righteous person, right? So someone, Mary asked this question, Chazonish, of Avram Shai Karo, to bless the memory, Torah giants in Bnei Brak of the last generation. We really built the whole community there. And he asked this question. There was, I guess, someone he knew was potentially going to date somebody that that this woman the parents did not keep family purity laws. So obviously the parents weren't religious. Let's say. So Chazon said, if she's going in the right path, and she wants to be strong in Torah mitzvahs, there's no problem. He says absolutely no problem. Yeah. All right, there's a blemish on the soul, other things, okay, it doesn't matter. He certainly held no that way. But yeah, if a person was born, the father wasn't Jewish, the mother was Jewish, that's a different issue. Right? That would be that would be a very different that'd be a very different issue. Some said the convert parents' children might be the forbidden relationship. Could be a forbidden relationship, but again, even if it is a forbidden relationship, right? That would be even stranger, right? That you would have, someone that converts that becomes, through that offspring becomes a Messiah. Yeah, it'd be kind of strange. Would be kind of strange. But could someone from a forbidden relationship be, if they were from the right tribe, right? They did what they needed to do, and they go straight to King David. There they could be. Listen, if if the Messiah can come from an incestuous relationship, why can't and come from Moab, right? The future Messiah is an offspring of Ruth, who came from Moab very clearly. Yeah, so why not? That I would think that's worse. It's one of the reasons. Boaz, who marries Ruth, dies right after they get married, and she conceived straight away. They say because God kept him alive for so long. He was like the Torah giant of the generation. The judge in that generation, or the main judges in that generation, wasn't befitting his pedigree, even as righteous as Ruth was, to marry a Moabite. Nonetheless, even though she converted, right? Nonetheless, through their offspring comes the Messiah. It's mind-boggling, and the whole story is mind-boggling, right? In many ways. Yeah, let me see other questions here. Someone said requires a seal to my face. Beard gets longer, it won't seal. It's permissible to trim it to keep it short. Someone here says use nose pillows, that might take care of it. Could you trim it in that case? If it won't seal, it won't do the job, then probably allowed to. Then probably you should be allowed to. Right? Otherwise, if you get around the problem, then better get around the problem. If you can't. Then you would be able to trim it. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so no questions. I'm going to sign out. I just every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, feel free, shoot me an email. Or you can find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There we got videos of Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com.